I actually find Apuleius in his defense of himself as a magician in a work called The Apology very helpful, because he defines magic as a simple communication with your gods and divine beings. It's acts of communication.
A lot of the times that I've heard apologetic defenses of Jesus not doing magic is an argument along the lines of, well, he's not doing magic because he's not using paraphernalia like talisman. He's not using complex, complicated strings of words like you see in the Greek magical papyri, which it's a string of vowels or unintelligible words that we call voces magicae.
All right, so Dr. Henry, Dr. Litwa, welcome to our show.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thanks. Appreciate it.
Awesome. So, when I invited you both on, I found it very interesting that you both had subject matter specialties that coincided, specifically ancient Christian history. Specifically, the topic we're talking about today is going to be ancient Christian magic. Dr. Henry, could you start us off by just kind of telling us a little bit about ancient Christian magic, what it entails, how is it related to the earlier forms of demotic magic that we find in the scrolls?
Magic is one of those words that is so difficult to define. I often say it's not a separate thing from religion. Like when you have a ritual that calls upon a higher power to accomplish something that you desire, like what is the real difference between a prayer and writing something down on an amulet or a curse tablet? Like if you say, "Dear God, please protect me," that's a prayer. And if you put it on an object and you wear that around your neck, suddenly it's called a talisman or an amulet. So a lot of the bifurcation between religion and magic is a subjective distinction. The same goes with miracle versus magic. Jesus himself was accused of doing magic by some of his opponents, like Celsus, as described by the early Christian author Origen. So when I define magic, when I use the term magic, I'm usually referring to small-scale rituals that people do on an individual level. I try to avoid the term actually and use more specific terms like rituals that are meant to protect or curse or heal, because so many of these things that we call magic fall into one of those categories. So a healing spell or formula, please take away this headache from me. Protection, keep this demon away from me, and lumped into that as exorcism. And then cursing. We have all these objects that are lead curse tablets called defictiones, where you would write down like, curse so and so for stealing my cloak. May the power of the gods subject judgment upon him. So we have rituals about cursing, protecting, healing, exorcising. And if we want to call that magic, let's use the term very loosely, because it's not necessarily, when we use the word magic, it suddenly brings up ideas of secrecy or subversive or evil. But as far as we can tell from the archaeology of magic, this stuff wasn't being done in secret. You were likely able to go to your local shop and be like, "Hey, I really need an amulet for my sick baby. What can you do for me?"
Yeah, absolutely. It really, our distinction between things like magic and religion, as Marvin Meyer points out in his text, the text of ancient Christian magic, he says that we really tend to, nowadays, scholars create this false dichotomy between religion and magic as something we do versus what they do. I find it very interesting that there's a lot of continuity between what's going on. I mean, even though the theology may change, for lack of a better term, they're still doing the same technological practices. So I found that very interesting. Dr. Litwa, did you want to take this up?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a super introduction that's already been given. You have to start out with theoretical observations here. And yeah, the fact is there's been an apologetical stream that has continually tried to distinguish either religion and magic or miracle and magic. And a good example of this is, the phylacteries that Jews are called upon to wear. And yeah, so if you're Jewish, it's a phylactery. If you're Greek and Roman, it's a talisman. And you can have negative nuances that are wrapped up in this unnecessarily for the Greeks and Romans, who are you know still called by that Christian name of depreciation, the pagans. So we need to be very careful about that. There's many imprecatory prayers in the Psalms, and these are essentially curses. But we use a kind of fancy, name, imprecatory prayer, so that we can kind of clean up the the violence of the rhetorical language. I actually find Apuleius, in his defense of himself as a magician, in a work called The Apology, very helpful, because he defines magic as simple communication with your gods and divine beings. It's acts of communication, and it is. Yeah, oftentimes there's a certain domesticity to the rites, so the rites will be performed home. In the home, they're of a smaller scale. Um, then they can be performed anywhere. So if you wanted to distinguish, state cults, the big state cults from magical practices, you might be able to do that on the idea that the state cults, when they want to sacrifice, everybody's involved. It's a public holiday. It's a huge festival with a feast, and they bring in this huge bull, and it's sacrificed by a large altar. Everyone can see it. It's public. And yeah, the smaller scale rites, as Dr. Henry said, they're not secretive, but they are more private in many cases. So you'll do it at night at a junction of three roads, or you'll do it in your living room. Um, I mean, I'm tempted to almost queer the discourse here, because you could just define all miracle as magic, and we could just define you know every everything as magic, including Jesus's miracles, and
I was
just
about
see
to
where
get to
that
that.
takes us.
Yeah, I mean, ironically, so my dissertation advisor in my doctoral program, David Frankfurter, writes about this in his book Christianizing Egypt. And he uses the term magic not as a high fidelity definition, trying to identify certain rituals, but as a very loose heuristic. He almost uses it almost as just as an adjective. Like, this thing is magical, this thing is magical, insofar as it is efficacious, it has agency. So he'll use terms like there's a magic to the spoken word, and that magic of the spoken word could be in a quote unquote sanctioned religious situation, like I baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Boom! Suddenly you are baptized. Like that. There's a magic to that word. Like that phrase was said by a literate specialist, and something happened. He says there's a magic to the written word. So if you write down something, and especially in a mostly illiterate society, the power and the efficacy and the agency that writing has. So he happily applies the term magic to almost anything, as a qualifier, not as a type of ritual, but as a quality of a ritual. If the ritual means to bring some agency or power into the here and now, let's call that magical. And that could be something as simple as a wedding. I pronounce you a married couple. Boom, your ontological status has changed. So in that case, it's playing with the term magic.
Well said. Well
Yeah,
said.
performativity is part of it, where you say something, and then by the very act of saying it, you do it. Yeah.
Absolutely. I was reading Brian Copenhaver's book, The Book of Magic. I think it's a re-release of an earlier text he did, but he makes this really interesting point about Simon. Getting back to one of your specialties, Dr. Litwa, Simon of Samaria. Like, we think of Acts chapter 8, verse 4 through 25 as nowadays, because we're looking at it from a certain point of view, with certain kinds of glasses on back on the text, that Simon's doing something bad because he's asking Peter for, give me this power. But Copenhaver makes a really interesting point. He says that it's a natural mistake, um, them doing this in Acts, because in Simon's day, magic was a commercial enterprise. You have religious specialists, making recipes, charms, curse tablets, amulets, talismans, love potions, just like y'all are talking about. So um, that was very interesting. And Dr. Litwa brought up, New Testament, Jesus cursing. I'm really reminded of Jesus in Mark chapter. What chapters is that? Chapter 11. Mark 11 verse 12, where he's cursing the fig tree. And then I'm thinking about Paul in 1 Corinthians 5 verse 5, where he's talking about he's basically like doing a Greek magical papyri curse. He's like saying, hand this guy over in the flesh to Satan. He's saying, elethron tes sarkos, in the flesh, and he's like present in the spirit of the Lord. Tu emo pneumatos sun te duname tu curio. He's present in the power of the Lord when they're going to hand this guy over to Satan to be destroyed. I found that very interesting. Like, we're looking at it with this artificial divide, whereas like somebody at that time, there's no huge distinction there. I just wondered if y'all had any further thoughts on that.
Yeah, interesting point. So in John 3, we hear that, the Spirit blows where it wills. But if you look carefully at Acts chapter 8, and this is distinctive to Acts chapter 8, there's the people are baptized, including Simon, who, becomes a Christian just like everybody else. And there's a delay in the giving of the Spirit, so that the apostles have to trot down to Samaria, and then the Spirit only comes upon people exactly when the apostles lay their hands on people. And so it's very different than what you find in John. It's not the Spirit just comes upon anybody. The Spirit comes whenever the apostles apply their hands. And it's that performative aspect that, I won't say mechanical, but predictable aspect, the predictability of the Spirit transmitted through hands. That's what Simon observes, and that's what he wants to get. And of course, Peter goes ballistic, and but Simon, instead of trumping away, wanting to claim battle against the apostles, like Irenaeus says, he cries and he says, pray for me standing. But that's really how the text actually portrays the giving of the Spirit. It's a magical operation, I would say, because of that performative aspect.
Excellent. What about you,
And
Dr. Henry?
yeah, I mean, a lot of the times that I've heard apologetic defenses of Jesus not doing magic is an argument along the lines of, well, he's not doing magic because he's not using paraphernalia like talisman. He's not using complex, complicated strings of words like you see in the Greek magical papyri, which it's a string of vowels or unintelligible words that we call voces magicae. And Jesus just uses usually short sentences like peace be still, or just laying on of hands. Setting aside the two miracles where he uses spit, it's almost always just speech and gesture, but the effects are similar. It is causing things to happen in the here and now supernaturally. So the difference is not so much uh, quality; it's just a difference in complexity. And there's still a performative aspect of putting a hand on somebody or saying something authoritatively. And so much of what we would call magical practice probably entailed that short formulas, laying on of hands, but that's the sort of stuff that doesn't survive in the archaeological record. What survives in the archaeological record are papyrus formulas from Egypt, sometimes bronze amulets from Asia Minor or Syria, but like so much of what we call magic is lost to us that was probably happening every single day.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm just reminded of Mark. Jesus is telling everybody constantly, "Igairo, Igairo, rise," right? So he's like commanding them like with some kind of power. Well, gentlemen, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for coming on, Dr. Henry. Where can people find you?
I guess the main place you can find me online is my YouTube channel, Religion for Breakfast. So youtube.com/religion for breakfast. It's a one-stop shop world religions YouTube channel.
Dr. Litwa, where can people find you?
Yeah, just punch my name into YouTube. I've got a small channel as well as a Patreon, and yeah,